Today at ShopTap.com, we're going to be showing you how to install a transmission mount on a facelift MK7 GTI. Okay, so today we're going to be installing this trans mount. This is a BFI one. This is a stage one. It's going to have, easy to tell because it has the black insert of the mount. The stage twos have the green. The difference, stage one, stage two is going to be stiffer, more performance oriented. These mounts, while they will cause some vibration inside the vehicle, because obviously once you kind of plant the engine harder to all the body of the vehicle itself, you will get a little more vibration. These, from my experience, the driver's side, which was going to be the transmission mount, and then the passenger side, which is the engine mount, don't cause as much vibration as what you might expect to get from the pendulum mount, which is the rear one, which we're going to be doing the Dogbone Insert as well in a separate video. So that's basically what we're going to be doing today on this side, and we're going to be working on the driver's side engine, and we have to take out the battery, airbox, and all this stuff to access the trans mount, and we're going to show you jacking it up from underneath to allow us to support everything and show you how to do so. So we're going to be working on the driver's side of the vehicle. We're going to be taking the battery, airbox, ECM, a bunch of these components out of the vehicle. But before we do that, we want to show you from the bottom where we're going to have to jack from to make sure we support the transmission side of this vehicle and make sure nothing falls down once we release the transmission mount itself. So let's get under there. We're going to show you what it looks like so we can have an idea of what we're working with when we get the thing jacked up. Okay, so we have the belly pan off this vehicle. Again, it's just the torque screws that hold it on, just so we can access our transmission and see what's going on here. You are going to want to take that off as well, because you are going to need to take a block of wood and kind of mount it in place here, and you can kind of get a floor jack underneath here to prevent anything from scoring the aluminum of your trans case. So this is going to be is a manual trans. DSG is going to look a little bit different, but the same overall concept. So all you're going to do is jack from here like so, and then jack up from underneath to support this when you take your transmission mount out of the vehicle. All right, we're going to start by taking our air box out of our vehicle, and we have our hose clamp pliers. You don't need these, but these are extremely nice because you can do that and just lock that in place. If you're using regular pliers with these, you will slip off a bunch and it will be a painful experience. So I'm going to put this right over here for now, and then we can slide our hose off there. And now we're going to take our secondary air pipe off, and all we're going to do is, you can either do one of two things. You can use a pick to kind of pry underneath these clips. There's going to be one on the other side, or you can try to squeeze and kind of wiggle it off. So depending on the age of the vehicle, usually determines how hard this is. And not too bad because this vehicle is pretty new, but that can be difficult. So essentially, if you're trying to pry it with this, you can try to pry under here and kind of get it to release, and then try to do the same on the other side from kind of underneath here. So you can kind of get at from that side and get your secondary air pump hose off. Now, we are going to take this suction hose off, and we're basically just going to get a pick in there and then kind of work it around a little bit to allow this thing to pull off. And there we go. Now, our airbox is going to be disconnected from all the things that hold it on. There is this duct that it goes into, but it just has rubber mounts that kind of pop it in place. So if we take a look over here, we can take a look at these rubber mounts. Okay, so you have a rubber mount here and a rubber mount here. And so I'm going to pull from the back side here and kind of pop it up off of there. Same there. Now, I'm going to take this in and I'm going to rotate it back to allow this airbox up and out. Now we're going to disconnect our battery, and there's just these 10 millimeters on the post here. Just loosen that one, and then we can loosen this back one here. And we're going to want to take our negative off first. And make sure you're not grounded out somewhere. And we'll take our positive off. And now we're all set there. And I'm going to actually remove down here, there's a clip that actually holds the cables in place. We are going to have to remove this battery tray so we can actually pop this out of the place so that we can get it out of the way before it becomes an issue. Now we're going to take our 13 right here. This is the clamp that actually holds the battery in place. So we're going to take this out, and then we can take our battery out. Once we unbolt that, you can kind of pull it from the side here and flip it up because it kind of hooks down there. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and now we should be able to move our battery out, slide it out of the way, and then pick that up. Now we're going to take this battery tray out. First, I'm going to loosen this 10mm nut back here. And keep in mind, this is not really something that needs to come out. It just needs to be loosened so that you can slide this thing out. It's actually not captive, so it'll be able to slide out once we unbolt these other ones that actually mount this tray in place. So we're going to take out these 10mm right here. There's one, now we're two. And then there's a third one over here. Now this one has this that clamps right onto this edge there. It's kind of in the way, but it's more importantly, it's going to keep that battery tray from getting out. So we are going to want to take this 10mm and take it out all the way, and then remove our screws here. Now, those are out and loose, and you can see we still have some cables over here that are on the front. Loosen them up, get them out of the way, and kind of push down and pull out. Now, we didn't take this one off earlier, so we can show you kind of from the back side here. Okay, so here we are with our battery tray flipped upside down. This is that clip that we were talking about that we waited on. Now you can kind of just pop the edges in with a screwdriver or a pick like that, and then we should be able to use that to pull it through the other side. All right, now we're going to take this ECM out of the vehicle, and we're going to swing it out of the way there, and we can have our cover here. We're going to pop this cable out of the way, and so we can access our trans mount, which we can see the beginnings of now. Okay, so now we're going to remove this bracket for the ECM, and there are two 10mm that hold it in place. Now, we are going to remove this, just slides out of place like so, and we are going to remove this bracket. Now this just pulls up off this frame rail and has clips on there, but for the purposes of our video, we are actually going to be showing you it with this cover removed and the wiring out of the way, because otherwise we're not going to get enough movement and play to really get you good visibility. So we're going to take this cover off, we're going to come back and have this thing pop out of the way, but this thing should just pull up like so to get you the visibility you need. Okay, so taking that cover off did not help us because these cables are attached to this thing, and frankly, it doesn't make sense to cut all this stuff off of here to access that. So what we're going to do is take our 16mm, we're going to get this in place on our bolts, and then crack them loose. All right, and there's bolt number 2. So as you can see, we can kind of we have our 2 bolts in here and 2 over here, and we're just going to lift this up while we get in here. Now, this bolt back here was a little bit tough to get to, so what I actually ended up having to do was stick a ratchet in like so and get in at this angle and have a very short travel here. This is probably what you're going to have to do to get this in place. Maybe a wrench might work better for you, or if you have an extension that's exactly the right length to fit in there, it is kind of challenging to get in there. So you will have to work around that. And now we're going to go to our rear ones, which have a little bit more space to work with. All right, now we're going to crack that back one loose. We got the front one. Now we can try to get to our back one. As you can see, getting a socket in there is easier said than done. We're using a deep 16. If you have a shallow 16 with just the right size extension, it will make your life a little bit easier. But I'm just going to get this thing loose to where I can thread it by hand and then get this socket out of place. Okay, we will not need to support our engine just yet, or engine and transmission, because obviously gravity is holding all this stuff down. So this is bolted to the frame rail and this sits on the frame rail itself. And so when we actually get our jack under our trans, we don't need to do so until we're looking to take these 3 bolts off right here, which actually mount this transmission mount to the transmission itself, or actually to the bracket that mounts to the transmission. So we can continue to thread these bolts out without any worry of having to support the transmission. Now our last bolt is out, and we can get underneath the trans and jack under there to get this thing supported. Now it's much better. All right, now we have our 3 18s. So we're going to crack these loose. And again, at this point, you need to make sure you have your transmission properly supported so you don't have any issues with anything falling. And we're out now. And as you saw when we kind of got that last one threaded out with our impact, you saw it kind of everything shift. So we're going to slide this guy out of here. Now we're going to install our BFI mount. As you can see, there is these alignment pins. So you are going to want to make sure you get them lined up in the correct place in the frame rail, which you can see is in between the bolt holes here. So we're going to get this dropped in place, and you can see they kind of just line up on their own. Not a whole lot you need to do there. Now we are going to get this trans bolted in place. Now the one thing you have here is, because this stuff shifts around, you may want to just lift this thing up and get these bolts threaded in place first, because otherwise you may struggle with getting them in, and maybe we can worry about the alignment pins after the fact. Once we get them threaded in place a little bit, you can get the trans, give it a little wiggle to get everything sitting down where it belongs. All right, so those are threaded in, and we have this still needs to be seated in place because we moved it so that we get this thread in place. You could also leave the trans mount sitting in its alignment pins and then try to wiggle the trans, but it's probably going to be easier to go this way and actually just get this thing in place like that. So that was pretty easy to do and took a lot less effort. You'd be wiggling it for a while to get each one of these bolts in place the way it was before. So as you can see, there's a lot of tension on this bolt. You cannot turn it by hand, and that's because the weight of the trans is pushing backwards. So this one, what we're going to want to do is get these threaded in place, and then we can kind of either jack up or let down the transmission to try to relieve some of this tension off there. But I want to get these other ones down here threaded in place first. All right, so we got the ones threaded in here so that we can get them set in place. I now have this one threaded down most of the way. This one doesn't turn easily, and neither does this one. So what I'm going to do is take my floor jack and then lower it down just a little bit. So we're gonna take a watch of what's going to happen here as we do so. We're going to do it really slow to take some of the tension off these bolts. So lowering it down actually was not effective. So here's what we're going to do. I have, this is the biggest screwdriver that we include with our screwdriver set, which we will link to. But what you're going to do is, what I'm going to do is use this as a pry bar to wiggle the transmission against the body of the vehicle. And this should help us relieve some of the tension off the mount here and loosen up these bolts a little bit. So generally, we may need to release a little bit of tension because it feels like it may be not enough. Looks like we got a rear one good here. And the reason why I do this, you could, once you get these threaded in, you could just run them home, but I do want to make sure that you don't have too much tension on your threads and you end up taking some metal with you while you're doing this. So I'm gonna lower this jack down a little bit just to see where we're at with that. So as you can see, when you take this screwdriver in here, you straighten it out like that, it makes this able to be turned by hand. And really that's what you're looking to do, is just loosen it enough to make it relieve a little bit of that tension. Okay, so now we got plenty of good thread there. I feel okay that we can run this down the rest of the way without worrying about any issues. This thing is plenty of threads in there, and the other two are basically completely in there. And so I'm going to get this threaded down. I will jack this up to make sure that the transmission and engine are mated. Now you want to make sure, if you watch this bottom here, the way this sits is you want to make sure it's flush, and so that this side and this side are both flat against there. Right now, this side is touching, and this side I can actually fit my finger in. So we're going to jack this transmission a little bit until we see them kind of meet. And you can see they kind of sat down right there. Now I'm going to thread this guy and the rest of the way down. And you don't really want to be pulling up this transmission with the threads of the bolts if you don't have to. It probably could work and is effective, but it wouldn't be my preference in the way to bolt this thing down. And we will include the torque specs on these bolts in our video. Now we have tightened our 4 bolts down here. We will include those torque specs as well. We're not going to show you any of that, frankly, because all you're going to see is the back of my hands and a bunch of struggling. This stuff is not easy to get to. The angle of this stuff and the wiring gets in the way. It makes it challenging to get a ratchet in there or anything like that. So what I found actually is something with a swivel head on it would actually be the best thing. And we have all those snugged down, tightened up, and we can proceed with the rest of our install. All right, so now with the rest of our install, the best place to start would be with this this plastic bracket. It just has those things that push in place. So you will want to make sure you line them up in their appropriate place, and then you're just going to need to push down. This one, I've found if you kind of get underneath here like so, you can get a flashlight under there, make sure it's lined up in the frame rail, and then it just pops down right in place. And then same deal here, make sure that one's all the way in place. And we're all set. We're going to throw our cover on, which hopefully you didn't take off like we did. And then we're going to proceed with the rest. All right, now we're going to install our bracket again. Slide that onto our studs. And then put our 10 millimeters, these nuts in place, and tighten them down. Okay, so now we're going to get this battery tray in place, and I'm going to swing it in there like so, and then work it up to a 10 mil in the back, get it pushed in place, and then we can swing our ECM in place as well. There we go. And once you have this thing sit down, you can pretty much feel it kind of get into place. You will want to just double check to make sure that your screw holes actually line up where they're supposed to once you get that in place. We're going to clip this wire on here and this wire on to the side right here. And then we're going to move those out of the way and move this out of the way so we can get our battery mounted in place. Now, if you take a look at the back of the battery box here, there's a lip under here. So what we're going to do is slide the battery all the way back so it gets underneath the lip. You want to make sure you obviously have the positive and the negative in the right place. And then slide that all the way back. And then we can take our bracket here. And this is what we're looking to hook in place. So the battery blanket, just slide it up a little bit. And that kind of just slides in place like so. And we can grab our 13mm bolt for there. And we'll snug that up and push our blanket down. And we can put our battery terminals in place. So we're going to put the positive on first and the negative on last. All right, now when we tighten these 10mm, first of all, this ratchet is pretty long, so you're not going to want to work with something this long generally. You're just going to snug this thing up just ever so slightly. These are basically just a bolt with a square end and then a nut on the other end. If you end up stripping this, you will regret it because that is not part. The bolts are generally not sold individually, which means the only way to get them is with the entire battery cable. So do not strip them. We're going to snug this one up now. All right, now we're going to install our cover here, and this is going to mount right on these rubber grommets right here, here, and here, which we showed coming off of. You will want to make sure that this hose is kind of clear as you go on. Go down like so, hook it up and in to the radiator support here. That's really where we're looking to make sure we go for. Clear that. Line it up with your grommets, and then pop it down in place. And then we're going to make sure we have our vacuum line here. Make sure that's in place. And then make sure our secondary air pipe, you can hear a click like that. And our hose can go on. Grab our hose clamp pliers. And slide that out. Now we're just going to install our belly pan, and we've completed our transmission mount install on our MK7 .5 facelift GTI. Again, purchases for parts like this or any others help support videos just like this one. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.